Today I'd like to start off by talking about someone whose work I find particularly inspiring, and that's Andy Moore. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Andy Moore, but he's an indie game developer, probably most famous for Steambirds and the recently released Monster Loves You. And one of the things that's really amazing about Andy Moore is actually not those games, but another game he did called Iceburgers. Now, I think by his own admission, Iceburgers was not the success he had hoped it would be, but the thing that's so amazing to me is that he did Iceburgers in 8 days. So he went from idea to an iOS game in 8 days. Now, I'm sure you're familiar with our 4-year development cycle on just even the first version of Retrograde, and then the PC version took some extra time. So certainly 8 days and 4 years there's a large gap between those schedules. Now, the thing that I find remarkable is that it would be very difficult for me to release something in 8 days. And I'm not talking about in terms of programming. I'm pretty good at programming. I'm sure I could throw something together, but it's almost like emotionally and just from a perspective of development, I don't know if I could do 8 days, if I could put the game out there and feel okay with that. And I think this maybe circles back, certainly to my obsessive compulsive disorder, but also to my experience as a AAA developer. But I think when you're approaching indie game development, you have to approach it differently. And so at the end of all the big projects, there's a mentality that's, at least we always joked in the office, just ship it. So at the end of these big AAA games, we're like, just ship it, just ship it. It doesn't actually matter, what you do as long as it works. So you just have to get it out the door. And I think every project reaches that point, but I think, except maybe Retrograde, we never really got there. But I think if you approach indie development, you really have to have that just ship it mentality, because you don't have infinite time, you don't have infinite resources, and I don't think people are really going to notice. So, people notice the details, and certainly we put a lot of cool details in Retrograde, but I think it didn't help us in terms of sales. It didn't help make us, successful indie developers and such that we can keep paying the bills. So here's a good example. On my new project, I wanted to use matrices. Of course, they're very useful for graphics. And on Retrograde, we rolled our own matrix classes and objects, and it was all optimized for AltaVec and SSE2 and very complicated. So with this project, I'm trying, the just ship it mentality and sort of the game jam mentality as well, because I think a lot of these successful indie game developers sort of came out of the game jam scene, which is something that I'd love to do, but I'm kind of afraid to. So anyway, matrices. So I looked at a bunch of different matrix libraries, and one of the things I was thinking is like, oh, we really need SIMD support, and we want it for both Neon and SSE, in case we're doing, mobile, PC, whatever. But then, basically, I couldn't find a matrix library that I liked, so I ended up just saying, okay, I'm going to throw in GLM, and GLM is a free one. That's pretty easy to use, and so I was just thinking, whatever, I'll just get something that's easy to use, and it, of course, doesn't have Neon support and blah, 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 but, and it was tough for me to get to that point. It was tough for me to say, okay, this is good enough. I'm going to just use this, and then I don't like some of the ways it works, like they do the multiplication order in the opposite way that I'm used to, and it's missing some functionality that I would like in terms of ease of use, in terms of optimizations, but the thing is that it's probably good enough. It's probably good enough, and it's gotten us up and running quicker than if we had tried to create our own or tried to evaluate all sorts of different libraries. And so one of the things is that it's even hard for me to, type the unoptimized code when I know there's a better way, which of course is something you really have to do if you're doing game jams and rapid development and I think in general indie development. So one of the things I've been doing, which I think maybe is a good technique, is I create a version of the function where something could be optimized, but then I just do the really cheap and easy, well, not cheap in terms of performance, but the easy to do implementation that's horribly unoptimized. And then I can optimize it later. And I'm guessing that I probably won't. I probably won't ever need to optimize it later. But it's good for me because I feel like we won't suffer from, death by 1,000 cuts later in development, because we can basically say, okay, here are some things that are slow, here's some ways to get a performance boost, but also I don't have to spend the time, optimizing it, doing everything the right way. So that's at least been my approach thus far on my new project, and I think it's working out pretty well.